For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Newton. I'm the president of the Reading League Wisconsin, and we are the Wisconsin chapter of a national organization called the Reading League, which is based in New York. And we share the Reading League's mission, which is to encourage the awareness, the understanding, and the use of evidence-aligned reading practices. For us, the term reading practices is really a pretty broad one, and it encompasses instructional materials and methodologies, as you would suppose. It covers assessment and intervention. It covers general and special education. It covers teacher preparation and where to find in-service professional development and coaching for teachers and administrators, and making connections between educators and families. We're not out to convince anybody that we're right or we have the right only answer, but we are here, as our tagline says, to share knowledge and inspire change. And we share our knowledge in a variety of ways. We do present some of our own professional development on a variety of topics. This summer, we'll be doing a deep dive into phonological and phonemic awareness. We also invite state and national leaders to share with us, and we also pass on information on at least some of the many wonderful presentations that are being hosted by other organizations this year. So we put a lot of that information on our Facebook page, we tweet it out, we do occasional newsletters, and we put that information in there. If you have topics that you're particularly interested in, please feel free to send us an email. I'll put our email in the chat in a moment, but it's info@wi.thereadingleague.org. Our motivation, we are all volunteers at the Reading League Wisconsin, and our motivation to do this is that we do believe that all children have the right to read, and that all educators deserve the support that they need to be effective with all students. So we're grateful today to Rachel and her Roundtable of Wisconsin educators for sharing their science of reading journeys with us. Before they get started, I just wanted to say, if you signed up for a certificate of attendance, we need you to confirm that you are actually online today. So I'm going to put a little link in the chat box. In fact, I will do that right now. And then we'll be sending out certificates today or tomorrow. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to Rachel. I'll let you introduce yourself and get this started.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you to our panelists for their time as well. We appreciate your dedication to education and giving your Saturday morning to learning about these 5 people and their journeys to the science of reading. And I know science of reading can mean a lot of different things to different people. So today, I'm hoping through some of the things that we're doing, we will continue to build that common understanding. We will be doing a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to put questions into the chat box as we go along. Each of our 5 panelists will be introducing themselves as they get started. I will be moderating as we go through, and I'm going to get us started. Just reminding you to please mute your mic unless at the end during Q&A you'd rather raise your hand and Mary will see that and call your question and give you time to ask that if you'd rather speak live than typing in your question. And this session will be recorded and put on our YouTube channel at in the next day or two. I think it's really important for us to get an understanding of our 5 panelists and where they are throughout Wisconsin. So I created this to give you an idea of where in Wisconsin everybody is coming from. These are our 5 panelists today, and then we have another session already slated for April 15th. If you have not signed up for that, feel free to do that as well. And those people you can see will be coming from some of the same schools, universities, and then we have a few new locations that'll be coming during that. DC Everest and Sturgeon Bay will be 2 new additions as well. And I think what's really important is to get the common understanding, and the Reading League, our National Reading League, has been working on a definition of the science of reading, because as I said, definitions can vary depending upon what you're talking about in education. So I'm going to give everybody just a minute to read the National Reading League's definition of the science of reading. I think this definition, like I said, is really important because my journey to the science of reading started around 2 years ago, and literally had no idea of what that meant. What were the details behind it? It was a very, the broad definition. And that's our goal today, is for you to be hearing more of the details of what the science of reading means. And also to give you resources of where you can go to learn more. And I embedded a link in here to help us. What is the science of reading? The science of reading and defining movement. And this was created by our National Reading League. And this website just started recently and is available to you along with the National Reading League's website. And I'm going to play, it's just a 2-minute video. And I think it's a really important way to get us all to begin our morning to have a common understanding moving forward.
Humankind's most precious treasure is our children, and our future depends on them. We recognize literacy as a fundamental human right that empowers individuals in a society. We also know that grim life outcomes are connected to illiteracy. We are resolved to prevent the collateral damage that is incurred by our students, especially the most vulnerable among them, when adults have limited access to the convergent scientific evidence. Research has yielded proven assessment and instructional practices with which every teacher and leader should be equipped. We believe that providing educators with this knowledge is a moral imperative. We are committed to evidence-aligned reading instruction being scaled with a sense of urgency in a comprehensive and systematic way by multiple stakeholders. We know that our children can be taught to read properly the first time. In a knowledge economy, the currency of the 21st century will be built on the foundation of skilled reading. Students who can read well have a place at the table of opportunity, whether their aspirations lead them to preparation for college or the workforce. We believe in a future where a collective focus on applying the science of reading through teacher and leader preparation, classroom application, and community engagement will elevate and transform every community, every nation through the power of literacy. Join us.
So you are all here today joining us as we continue on our journey, and we are going to get started this morning with Dr. Colleen Pannell from Carroll University. And Colleen, I'll let you take it from here.
Hey, thank you, Rachel. So I'm excited to be here. I was excited to be invited to talk about this topic, because it's something that I reflect on quite a bit, kind of my whole journey as to, you know, how I previously thought about reading instruction to where I am today. And when I sat down to do my slides, I was completely terrified because it's such a complex topic, and it's difficult to encapsulate in one PowerPoint slide or two PowerPoint slide. So I decided I would tackle creating a graphic, which is what I did. So I'm going to try and share my screen right now and get up there. Let's see. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
So this is what I did, is I created a graphic to describe my journey, or my why roadmap, as to kind of where I've been and where I am today. And on the top here, you can see kind of the years of where I was, and underneath it, I put the pedagogy, or where my thinking was at that time during my time of instruction. And I graduated in 1995 with a degree in education. And at that time, I would say it was kind of the height of the whole language movement. And I was in contexts where I had no real curriculum. It was kind of a hodgepodge. There was no scope and sequence. It was pretty much a free for all. You went to the learning shop, found materials, and taught that way. I did start, though, to realize I needed to learn, and I began a program for becoming a reading teacher. So I obtained that license, and this is in Arizona and New Mexico. I was home with my children, though. I stopped teaching for a few years in the early 2000s, and that was at the time that the National Reading Panel came out with their recommendations, the 5 pillars of instruction. When I got back into the classroom in about 2004, 2005, I continued my education, decided to pursue a reading specialist license. And I would say balanced literacy was in full effect at this time. And it drew me in entirely, because what it did is it took whole language, and I think it gave tools to whole language. Whereas whole language kind of, for me, had nothing, balanced literacy now had something. It had approaches, it had a framework, I got it. And moreover, it had kind of a philosophy that I could get on board with. I could completely be about authentic text, child-centered instruction, teaching, you know, embedded, not in isolation. So those pieces were very much attractive to me. You know, I also had validation with regards to what I thought was research at the time. Voices of Authority, Richard Allington, for example, a big one, I would say. He wrote several books at that time about reading instruction and cited research. So, you know, these are the people you're looking to as credible, and they are telling you these are the practices that you really need to engage in. A lot of the ideas are, you know, kind of this research to practice of guided reading, teaching through a cueing system, engaging children in lots and lots of wide reading. So not necessarily teaching anything in isolation, but always doing it in context. The alternative to that would have been what and this is my perspective at the time, was a skills perspective. A skills perspective in my mind, and based on what I was hearing, decontextualized, inauthentic, teacher-centered, scripted programs, worksheets, drill and kill, you know, kids just barking at print. That very much was what I perceived to be kind of the alternative to balanced literacy. And I wanted no part of that. You know, that was not at all how I thought about education. So, you know, this whole kind of just put a graphic on, you know, basic, what we all know of how guided reading or cueing system approaches are attacked in the classroom. Things too, like I think of like Allington talking about reading recovery is the #1 researched, proven results for getting kids ahead, you know, first grade. And guided reading is basically a miniature version of reading recovery. So of course that's going to work. So really, I think for those of us that were brought up in the balanced literacy world, it made sense. And then I decided, I don't know what I was thinking, to keep going, because I needed to learn more. So I pursued a doctoral program in literacy and language. And it was the very first time I was ever introduced to cognitive models of reading. I didn't know what they were. And at the time, I remember my professor, Dr. Molly Schiffler, and she was doing a word model reading and she had strings. I think it must have been Seidenberg's model where she was showing us how it worked, how we learn to automatically recognize words. And basically her point was, you have to teach decoding. You can't teach through the cueing system. It's an ineffective way of teaching. And I'm summarizing. And I remember almost having a visceral response at the time, like, that's not right. That you're wrong. What about meaning? Everything about meaning, everything about context. But taking away, that was, I would say a domino effect for me as well, realizing when you work with kids, you have to always prompt them initially with decoding. And yet, even though I got that, it was still very abstract for me, the whole research to practice. What does that look like in practice? I still in the back of my head had kind of that old school skills idea of teaching reading. I hadn't quite figured out how that looks in an actual classroom. So it was there for me, but I hadn't put all the pieces together. And so I'm immersing myself now more so in sociocultural models. That was what I was attracted to, reading comprehension, language, and that's what I did my dissertation on, these pieces of literacy. Literacy is such a deep and wide field. I mean, it's huge and you can really go anywhere. So I had the knowledge of cognitive word reading models, but my depth of knowledge went into more sociocultural models of literacy. And when I put this graphic together, I thought to myself, this also probably for me was very comfortable because of where I was with balanced literacy. I think there's a comfort and some connection between these two pieces. Even though these models are not about word reading, they're very child-centered, very much about context, meaning, and so forth. So as the time goes on and the landscape of literacy starts to change and get questioned, in Wisconsin, we have dyslexia legislation coming through, the Foundations of Reading test, just Hanford's article, for example. Those pieces really forced me to go back into cognitive models, to really, really get it and think about what does this look like in a classroom? Is this whole skills perspective of teaching reading? Is it, as awful as I was perceiving it to be? And so when I went back into these models and really worked to understand them, and when I finally, what the watershed moment for me is when I finally got what orthographic mapping was. And it's not a simple concept at all. It took, a lot of reading, a lot of understanding. But once I got that piece, and once I realized that this is not about giving kids worksheets or, drilling kids with digraphs and diphthongs. This is really about a system, a sequence, and lots of rich practice within text and writing, that these practices are meaningful, they can be engaging. That to me was a huge light bulb moment for me where I'm starting to really put it together. And these pieces are not incompatible with my other views of reading, that I can still teach these pieces, but also give children lots of opportunity with great children's literature and classroom discipline environment and engage in critical thinking.
Perfect.
So that I think is really where I'm starting to shift. Today, what I would say, I have a less rock star mentality, and I hope that continues even with the science of reading, that we really are about ideas and not so much about people, or who we hold people up on pedestals, because we need to learn, I think, somewhat from what happened with balanced literacy too. There were a lot of rock stars and still are in that sort of world. And I hate to even say camps, that we have camps, but that we're collaborating and we are learning from all the available research to us, that's available to us. Believing for sure in that teacher knowledge and expertise. It's a huge piece of this, especially with teacher preparation. I was a blank slate when I started teaching, and no teacher should graduate from college as a blank slate. You should have some real skill and knowledge base of how word reading in particular works. So I'm not going to go through all of these. You can kind of see where my thinking was. And lastly, that both, I know science of reading is based on quantitative research, which makes sense when you're thinking about bringing things to scale. And yet qualitative research, I believe, is very important and provides important checks and balances as well for those large scale research studies. So that's kind of where I'm at today, and continuing to grow, continuing to learn, never thinking that I know everything.
Thank you, Colleen. And one of the questions that came off of that, we'll be coming back to this, will then be about how our universities are preparing our teachers now, and how is Carroll University, where you are at, how is that working? So we'll come back to that in the Q&A, okay? All right, next up is Lisa from Madison. Lisa, do you, whoops, sorry. Lisa, do you want to just leave the screen up that I have up, or do you want to share?
Yeah, no, that'll work fine. There's just one link later that in the event that doesn't work, then
Okay.
I can take over sharing rights.
Okay, great. This is the Hepburn, everybody, and she will take it from here.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Colleen, for that amazing presentation, and Glyphy, which I'll be looking into. What I've prepared for everyone is more of an infographic of how I got started. So I've been teaching 14 years in the capacity of an ESL bilingual resource teacher role in the Madison Metropolitan School District. And like Colleen, I found the task of consolidating my journey quite daunting. I would say that mine is roughly 3 years old. So what introduced me to the science of reading?
First of all,
I had been teaching as a bilingual resource teacher for about 10 years at grades 4 and 5. And I noticed that the majority of my English learners were disfluent readers, but I didn't know what to do about it. And then one day in September of 2017, a parent came to school and advocated for her child, who was then a 4th grader. She said that he hadn't had a good year the previous 2 years, and that she was very concerned about his reading, writing, and handwriting. And so a meeting was called with the principal, the classroom teacher, and his mother, and we decided that he would be in my charge. And I was scared because I'd never really taught anyone to read before. And so on a Saturday, I went into school, and using the master key, I let myself into our instructional coach's office. And I found a Phonics Intervention Kit, not even really knowing what phonics was, because I hadn't been taught to read that way. He responded well to it. And my student, that is. So later that year, our special ed support leader told me about an opportunity to receive training in something called Orton Gillingham. And I almost didn't do it because I knew how much work it was going to be. And I wasn't a special ed teacher. I didn't even know if I was going to use it. I didn't know if it would really be applicable to me. But I also knew that my own nephew had made tremendous gains with this approach. And so I went for it. And I'm so glad that I did, because on the second day of training, I learned that there was a massive body of scientific research about reading, how our brain isn't wired for reading, and that there are instructional moves that we can make to ensure reading success for approximately 95% of students. And that blew my mind, because I knew that I wasn't having a success rate anywhere near 95%. And right away, I understood the implications that this was information all teachers needed, not just special education teachers, that they didn't have it, and that currently the only way for students with even minor reading difficulties to receive structured literacy instruction was to get a special ed label. And even then, there was no guarantee. So the books that were required for my Orton Gillingham training were eye-opening to me: Speech to Print, on Unlocking Literacy, and Overcoming Dyslexia. So my Orton-Gillingham coursework was finished in the summer of 2018. And that fall, I started my practicum, 50 hours of a supervised instruction with 2 struggling readers for a total of 100 hours. My students were a 5th grader and a 3rd grader. And after an early observation, my OG trainer explained to me that my 5th grader was going to respond really quickly to the OG approach. And that's exactly what happened. She gained 2 years of reading progress as measured by the MAST. My 3rd grader would need much more support. He struggled tremendously with all aspects of early literacy, including letter formation. After about 2 months of instruction, though, his classroom teacher reported that he had much more confidence during whole group activities. And at the end of my work with him, his handwriting and reading fluency had improved dramatically, but he was still reading below grade level by at least 1 year, which makes a strong case for early intervention. While I was doing this Orton-Gillingham practicum, my instructional role was that of an ESL teacher at 1st grade. So that was a big shift I shifted from 5th grade down to 1st. And the Orton-Gillingham coursework made it clear just how important phonics instruction is. So I offered to teach phonics in each of the 5 1st grade classrooms. And I still, at this point, keep in mind that I didn't even really know what phonics was, 1 year prior. So quickly, before we go on to the next slide, you can see the journey here. I had Orton-Gillingham, and then at block 2, that's when Emily Hanford dropped her Hard Words podcast, which no one in my district was talking about. So like the science of reading was sort of my dirty little secret for a while. And then block 3, the Reading League came to Wausau, and my mind was blown fully. I met Donna Heidt-Manick that year, who was here watching. And then block 4, Emily Hanford came out with her next podcast, which actually called out a lot of the instructional programs that we were using. And then my position shifted to ESL teacher at grades 3-5. Next slide, please.
And I'm just going to thank you. I'm just going to quick pop in here for a second because I know it'll make more sense if I do it. I believe out of Hard Words, Emily Hanford's podcast, they talk about a school district, Oakland, California, and I've been learning a lot about that school district. And Margaret Goldberg, who was one of the teachers in that school district, and she started the Right to Read project, which I highly recommend. I was in an all-day symposium on Thursday from Amplify, and she did an hour-long presentation about her journey to the science of reading and that school district's journey. And I highly recommend you go on to Amplify and look at their journey as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yes, I thought it would make more sense if I popped in there and said it there. There you go. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. So, in my learning, I realized I needed my own ongoing professional development, that Orton-Gillingham alone wasn't going to do it. Colleen mentioned earlier that, orthographic mapping took her a really long time to understand, and I echo that sentiment. So over on the MAUV side, one of the online professional developments that helped me enormously was Reading Simplified, because something that I didn't quite understand in my Orton-Gillingham training was the importance of blending, and that there are different kinds of blending. And so what I was seeing is that kids actually had strong phonics knowledge, but they didn't know how to apply it to words, and they also didn't have the phonemic awareness. And I still, at that point, didn't understand the importance of phonemic awareness and how necessarily to align it to my phonics instruction. Very quickly here, I'll point out that Really Great Reading was another tool that I used. And then, now, so I'm teaching in grades 3-5. I have since taken the Reading Teacher's Top 10 Tools, which is an excellent online professional development that really takes the scientific research and brings it to the classroom. Some assessment tools that I'm using are the Teaching Reading Source Book and the Assessing Reading Multiple Measures books that come from CORE. This year, I am teaching a sheltered group of English language learners at grades 3-5. And as we get to grades 3 through 5, we really start to understand the importance of morphology and writing at the sentence level, which gets at syntax. And so 2 tools that I use that I rely on daily are the Reward series, which is authored by, one of the authors is the fabulous Anita Archer. And then also the Writing Revolution by Natalie Wexler and Judith Hochman. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this, but my big takeaways are that not all phonics approaches are the same, and speech to print is just crucial if we want to get the biggest bang for our buck. And it is possible to have phonics knowledge and not be able to apply it to word reading. Again, Reading Simplified really helped me understand this. There's a word chaining activity that she calls Switch It that really helped me with that. There's a lot of confusion about the terms sight words and high frequency words. Next slide. Thank you. And so moving forward, I am not really at liberty to say exactly where our district is going because the big announcement is coming to the public next week. But I am on a task force, which is a joint venture between our district and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It is being led by the esteemed Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. And I can tell you that letters is going to be a big part of that. So I'm looking at my time and I'm seeing that I have surpassed it. The final slide. Thank you. We probably don't have time for this. We might later, but I will say that this testimonial from a 17-year-old about the importance of explicit reading instruction, when he talks about his own metacognition about the reading, his reading process, it sounds, it sounds like he's a reading researcher because he knows. When you know that you're learning something in a systematic way, you can be articulate about it. So I thank you for your attention this morning.
Thank you, Lisa. If we do have time at the end, we will come back to that then if it works out for us. And thank you for sharing. And I know you can't go into more details about the task force that's being created between it's the Madison School District and the university, correct?
That's correct.
So we'll be very anxious to watch that and the information that comes out of it. And as a former Badger, I did my undergrad and grad at UW, and I am very glad to see that there is that task force being created because I graduated in 1990 and it was a whole language. That's how I was taught, and to see how things have evolved. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right, our next guest is Kari Donzi. Kari, I will let you take it from here.
All right, good morning. Thanks for having me here this morning. I'm just sitting here geeking out about all of these conversations. And I was also part of that symposium, or, listening in on it, and just took so much away from it. So yeah, Amplify is one of my go-tos for my continued learning as well. So I am a 4K through first grade literacy coach in the Rice Lake School District. And Rice Lake is halfway between Eau Claire and Superior if you're traveling north on 53. So my journey actually started in my initial teaching license program. I didn't know it at the time, obviously, but I attended St. Mary's University in Winona, Minnesota. And my reading methods professor was Jane Flynn Anderson, and she had a wealth of knowledge around phonology, the reading research. She had worked for the La Crosse Area Dyslexia Institute and had done some research there with fMRI studies back in the 90s. So she was able to share some of that research with us pretty early on. And again, a lot of it didn't really sink in with me. It was that initial exposure. We had the National Reading Panel report was our textbook for the class. So we did a lot around just reading the summaries and trying to understand effect sizes and things like that. So that was in, 2002. And then my first teaching job was actually as a middle school science teacher. So when I got into the field, I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention to early reading instruction. I was focused on inquiry-based science and STEM and those kinds of things. So I taught in middle school science for about 9 years. And then I had made a decision that I wanted to try to get back into an elementary classroom and do the whole classroom teacher thing. But I realized that because I had spent the last 9 years teaching science, that I'd forgotten a lot about, what does reading look like? How do I do this? And so I went back to St. Mary's and was fortunate in the time that I was in the classroom, Jane had actually created a K-12 reading teacher program for St. Mary's. So when I went back, I was fortunate to go through that program that she had created, knowing that it was aligned to what the research was saying. But again, I think even at that point, I didn't really realize what I had in her mentorship. So, through that licensure program, we analyzed the research from the National Reading Panel. We took a look at the National Early Literacy Panel report. Again, she presented her research with brain scans and showing remediation or normalization of brain activity with dyslexic children if certain practices were utilized in their intervention instruction. So that's kind of where I started. And then from there, I moved into a 6th grade classroom. So again, I wasn't necessarily teaching kids how to read, but what I was able to start seeing was some of the reading deficits and really figuring out like, wow, this kid is really dysphonetic in their approach to reading and writing. And so I started to see and be able to identify some of these deficits in our oldest, I shouldn't say oldest, but in my 6th grade students. And so it was very eye-opening. So I taught in the elementary classroom for a few years, and then I had an opportunity to move into early reading intervention. And that was where I think my eyes opened, right? Like I thought I knew a bunch about, reading research, but the application piece has kind of realized I'm like, I don't know what to do necessarily with this knowledge. And what does that look like when I'm sitting with a kid, for weeks on end and trying to move the needle with their reading instruction. And so that's where I started doing more and more research. And, that was 7 years ago that I started kind of digging in and was looking at, different resources, Recipe for Reading, their phonics scope and sequence, and trying to pull these pieces together. Because one of the things that we had talked about in my reading licensure program was we kind of avoided looking at like purchase programs, and we're trying to analyze the different areas of reading that we needed to be paying attention to, and recognizing that there isn't one program out there that's going to meet the needs of all the kids that we have. So really trying to dig into some diagnostic assessments and pinpoint student deficits, and then apply teaching strategies that would remediate that. So anyway, I did that for a few years, and then we moved to Rice Lake. So my teaching career actually started in Minnesota, and we've since moved to Rice Lake. So I've only been up here for 3 years, and I actually just started full-time in my position with the Rice Lake School District last January. So, some of the questions that are on here, I know, we had talked about what instructional materials, are essential for beginning or struggling readers. And some of the things that we're doing in the district right now is we're really taking a look at our phonics scope and sequence and making sure that that's aligned and streamlined from kindergarten through 3rd grade, really. And just the importance of explicit phonemic awareness and phonics instruction and what that looks like, in addition to connected text, so that students can practice the skills that are being taught on a daily basis, explicit handwriting instruction. And the question that I get often from the teachers in our district is, what about writing? How does writing fit into all this? So we're working on that. Again, we're very early in this process within the district, but some of the resources that I pull from now to continue my own professional development, the Reading League, right? The knowledge base that they've created, Amplify, for their podcasts and their different, the symposium opportunities that they present. I've done the letters training, at least the first 4 units. I'm still working on the second half of that. And then Patton out of Pennsylvania with, I'm blanking on her name now.
Pam Kastner.
Yes, Pam Kastner. Thank you very much. So you just see some of the names that I put down, and I know, Colleen kind of alluded to, we don't necessarily want to create rock stars or that whole thing, but some of those names on the bottom of the slide are the people that are my go-tos as far as the information that they put out. So if you go to the next slide. So like I mentioned, I started full-time in my position in January of last year. And so we were just gearing up and getting started to talk about, presenting an overview to the staff around the reading research. And I gave that presentation on March 6th, and 2 weeks later we were shut down. So I was so excited and so geared up, and we had a really positive response to the presentation. And then all of a sudden, all heck broke loose. So throughout shutdown, though, we did have the opportunity. We were registered to attend the Reading League kickoff event in April. So there was a small group that attended and learned from Patty Montgomery and Susan Hall. And then while we were closed, we also did a book study around Wiley Blevins' Fresh Look at Phonics. So that was something that was kindergarten through second grade staff kind of collaborated around the reading and the learning in that text. This school year, we've actually been face-to-face with students 5 days a week since the fall. So we came back, and there was quite a bit of anxiety at the beginning of the year, not really knowing, okay, are we going to have to shut down? What is this going to look like if we go virtual? So there was, there's a lot for the teachers to deal with this school year. And on top of that, we started to implement our FastBridge Universal Screener, which has been a driving force for how we talk about student learning and understanding, what some of their deficits are and what we can do about it in the classroom and in our small group instruction, and how skills-based instruction looks different from guided reading instruction. So again, these are kind of the slow changes that are taking place in our district this year on top of a pandemic year. So we've really been focused on K1 explicit phonemic awareness and phonics instruction. We've all of our classroom teachers have the phonemic awareness curriculum by Hegarty that we've been implementing, and we've been using the University of Florida's Literacy Institute resources to try to streamline our classroom phonics instruction around their word study approach, which I believe is Orton Gillingham based. So our 4K, we've adopted the Project Ready curriculum out of Mount St. Joseph's University. If you're familiar with Amy Murdoch and any of the work that she's done around early literacy, we've just purchased that curriculum and have started with it this year. Currently, I'm working with a small group of teachers, and we're doing the Equip for Reading Success book study by David Kilpatrick. And that it's really something that I would love to make a requirement for all of our teaching staff, because as we get into this, just the conversations that we're having, so many light bulb moments for the teachers, and just the wealth of conversation and just mindset shifting that's taking place because of the reading has been phenomenal. And then we are hoping to implement letters training starting this summer, but that will kind of be rolled out in a cohort basis based on people's own interest and timelines for that. So we'll have multiple opportunities to dive into letters training as well.
Thank you, Kari. And questions coming in, and I put it in the Q&A. So we will come back to the letters training because I know that's getting mentioned throughout. So please know that that will be in the Q&A at the end. Thank you very much, Kari, for sharing your journey. Next, we have Misty from Thorpe, and I will let Misty take it from here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction since I think our paths are fairly similar. So I am currently the principal in Thorpe at the elementary, and Thorpe is located between Eau Claire and Wausau on Highway 29. I also serve as the district's director of student services. So I've only sat in the principal's chair for 2 years. I've been in the district for 4. I was the director of student services before getting emergency license to become the principal. So I'm going to take you on our district journey. My journey is, my background is special education. I was a special education in the school district, in the Chippewa Falls School District for 17 years. Then I became a director of student services for CISA 10. Have worked in multiple school districts within our CISA. Then I had the opportunity to go to Thorpe, and I left my CISA job to go to Thorpe because of John Humphreys, who is our former superintendent. So the reason that Thorpe is in the situation that we are in is because of Mr. Humphreys. He came to Thorpe with a plan in 2017 and had a very strong background, excuse me, in multi-tiered systems of support when he used to work for the Department of Public Instruction. And that's really where I had my introduction to John. John brought to our board that the district was at the very bottom. We're at the bottom of our CISA. We were at the bottom of the state in reading achievement, and we were definitely trending in the wrong direction. So we completely overhauled our entire system. Right now we operate through data-based decision making, which we did not do in the first year that I was in Thorpe. We never had a data meeting. We had one at the end of the school year, my very first year, and we had someone from CISA come in and talk about it, and we looked at it and we thought, oh, that's nice. But we didn't do anything with that data. In year 2, we still didn't really do anything with that data. We had some people in the right places. We brought in a new psychologist at that time, but we still weren't making solid decisions. We brought in FastBridge. We were just trying to get accustomed to using FastBridge as our universal screener, but we weren't using it to its full capacity. And quite honestly, we never had formal training. We kind of trained ourselves. We were blessed that John had networked with some people, and we were able to contact Ed O'Connor. I think he's out of CISA 2. And he kind of gave us some guidance. So we're pretty self-taught in the data and the FastBridge. Until my year 3, which would, it was actually my second year, was when we first started on this journey. So we contracted with School Cubed out of Colorado, which is Patty Montgomery, and she's been mentioned before. Vicky Ferrari is our on-site coach. And then, we just started looking at our system. They came in and did a complete evaluation of where we were on our systems approach, looking at the multi-tiered systems of support, and we were at the bottom. They used something called their next steps report. We would probably had implementation around 7%, maybe 10% at that time. Some areas were a little bit higher. So we have moved from 7% that initial year up to about 75, 80% of all of our pieces in place. And as our implementation of a solid multi-tiered systems of support has increased, the number of needs of our students has decreased. So we know that the work that we are doing is working. Schools Cubed comes in 3 to 4 times a year. They do classroom observation. I work side by side with them. They're teaching me as they're doing their observations. Our reading specialist also joins us during observations right now. So she can do some more coaching around best practice within the classroom. So are we teaching explicitly? Are we getting high repetitions in? Are we using solid materials? Do we have eyes? Are we getting miles on the page? The first year that we went down this path, we also contracted with Donna Hitmonic. She was our coach the first year that we were there. And she really gave us a lot of guidance on, what materials to use, because we had no idea what we were doing in year one. And then we've had a series of administrative changes. So we are in our third year on this journey, but we're really in a solid year two. So, my first year sitting in the principal's chair, we really rubber met the road, and we really started moving and shaking and taking these pieces from Schools Cubed and really working on looking at the next steps report and responding to that and providing opportunities for our teachers to grow. So during COVID shutdown, we had the majority of our teachers trained in top 10 tools, and I took that training with them so I can talk the language. We can have conversations. We keep a subscription. I always am going back in to look to see what Dr. Deb has and has in hiding, and we can access that. We still work with Patty and Schools Cubed. We had some people trained in the Writing Revolution. In year one, our Title I teacher and our reading teacher went to Plain Talk in Louisiana. In year two, I went to Plain Talk in Louisiana and brought 2 special education teachers from me. And we were blessed to see some of all of the people that have been mentioned today, we've seen and have met. And probably the most profound one for us is Dr. Archer. We love her work. We also were able to, in our first year with Schools Cubed, we had a different, Angie Hanlon was our initial coach from Schools Cubed, and she had brought her building in Missouri from a building at the risk of being taken over by the state to one of the top performing schools in Missouri. So we also were able to take a trip to Missouri and visit Angie's class. And it was when Amy, our reading specialist, and I went to Missouri and came back. Once we saw, okay, big picture, we were like, okay, we can do this. So we came back and we, really assembled a solid data team. We have our school leadership team. We're constantly in the next steps report. We're planning, we're refining, and that's really been our journey up until this point. So if you want to go to the next slide, I think I've probably already talked about some of it, but so when I forgot Susan Nettie. So our very first introduction was Susan Nettie out of Louisiana. She has best practice associates. She came in and just did our universal training where our teachers learned how to say letter sounds correctly. She brought us through the pillars, and it was eye-opening. And for me, I was just kind of sitting back. I was an Orton Gillingham trained teacher in 2006-07. So I knew a lot of what Susan was talking about, and I could break up phonemes and just watching and listening. Because at that time I was the director of student services. I, wasn't running the show. So I just kind of got to sit back and listen to conversations. And I really, it was profound to hear our teachers get it and understand what a phoneme was and what a grapheme was and the difference between phonics and phonemic awareness and the progression of moving through the 5 pillars was pretty profound for us. I'm going to now just kind of go into our year 3. So our solid year 2. So up until this point, like I said, we work side by side with Schools Cubed, and I will tell you that there is no way that we could do this without their support. We don't have a director. We're a district of 536 students, 4K through 12. We don't have the resources. We didn't have the resources when we first started our journey. So, for us to have a superintendent manipulate the budget so we can bring all of these people in was a profound change. And we continue to have that support even though Mr. Humphreys is no longer with us. Our current superintendent supports the initiative, and he's right now he's just letting us do our thing, so it's been kind of nice. In year 3, we are really discovering, or again, year 2 for us, because of all of the turnover that we've had, we are really discovering the importance of database decision makings. Yes, we've done it. Yes, we've looked at our data, but we are into not only our benchmarking, but our data team is assisting our teachers who collaborate on Wednesdays, looking at progress monitor data. We make changes when we're not seeing growth. So it's taking that up to the next level. So we just consistently build and build and build until we're seeing proficiency from our students. And right now, I think overall our growth is it looks good. Our Fast Bridge progress monitoring data, we have more students that are either projected to meet or exceed their targets than we do the red triangles down. So, like I said, we're digging into that progress monitoring data, working with Schools Cube to look at our overall data to try to make some predictions on how we'll do on a state test in the coming months here. One of the things, the last thing that I want to talk about is just some staffing changes that we had made and that we're going to make because of the ESSER funding that we have available. So right now, our staff consists of we have a part-time school psychologist who spends a lot of her time digging into Fast Bridge with our reading specialist. We have a reading teacher. This year, we were able to add a Title I paraprofessional. So we are now seeing more students, and that allows our reading specialist to go in and do a little bit more coaching. Our speech and language clinician is heavily involved in this. And I will say, we underestimate the power of a speech and language clinician, because when it comes to vocabulary linguistics, she is our go-to. She's also taken on the charge of, now, how are we going to communicate this out to parents? So she and our team are currently now working on doing Cardinal Connection. So we're doing a series of videos to help parents, short videos that we'll push out to parents to talk about the pillars, what the pillars mean, and then some quick activities that they can do at home to support their students. Next year, we're going to actually add another reading teacher through ESSER. So we're excited to see what the state test is going to result. I think last year we were probably the only district in the state that was disappointed to not have state testing, because we really want to see the impact it's going to have, because we haven't seen that yet. We've had teachers flip triangles. Last year we had a first grade teacher that flipped her triangle at the winter benchmarking. We didn't get to do our spring benchmarking, so it would have been interesting to see what that end result. And another, I think, thing for Thorpe to celebrate was, and we started 2 weeks late because of some teachers contracting COVID and quarantining the majority of our staff. We've been in person, but we've also had some quarantines and shutdowns and some people learning remotely. But our growth from fall to winter did not drop. We either stayed consistent where we were or we grew. So we didn't have a whole lot of a decrease in skills due to all of the chaos that was COVID. So we're excited in Thorpe. We're excited to be on this journey. We work hard, but I will tell you, when I look at all of this science of reading stuff that's going on, and I see teachers trying to make this change in their single classroom, it's heartbreaking for me, because it's just not that easy. It's so big. It's so huge. And I'll never give Schools Cubed enough credit for the support that they give us. So without Schools Cubed, without Donna, without Susan, from building from the ground up, we would not be in the position that we're in to be able to sit here today and have conversations. So I don't do this work. I facilitate this work. I have some of the best educators. They are hungry for change. They do what we ask them to do. They are the ones that are in the ditches digging, and they're doing a fantastic job. So my staff deserves really all of the credit in this. I just get to be the one that, now enjoys what we see at the end. But it's been a ton of work for all of us, and to have a strong team is critical in the process.
And thank you, Misty. Thank you for sharing and doing that work. And it's hard for me as a former RTI director and coordinator. I always chuckle at our language and education, and words like "she flipped her triangle" makes me laugh. And I mean, for those of us that understand that, hopefully all of us, it's just that I love the educational language that we use. And I also appreciate the database decision. And I put that on our Q&A as well, to talk about schools and your conversation, your motivating people. Yes, it's a lot of work, but it's motivating to want to keep doing it. And wanting to see data that supports what you are doing. So I put that on as a question about data and where do we see data that's showing the growth that we're looking for. So thank you. And then now we have our last panelist is Erin. And Erin, I will let you take it from here.
Great. Well, thank you. All of you are a really hard act to follow. But wow, I mean, just wow. I think opportunities like this to be in such great company, I think are inspiring and motivating. I know that somebody put in the chat, it's hard to be a singleton. It's hard to even be a district trying to do this work around the science of reading. So thank you. I don't know if going last is the best place here, but I'm going to try to share our journey a little bit. And I'd like to sort of conceptualize it in chapters. I'm an avid reader, so I'll think about this work as in chapters. So I think our first chapter really started 3 years ago, and I'd probably title it A Willingness to Be Disturbed. In the fall of 2018, we welcomed a new curriculum and instruction director, and one of the first things she did was send me an article, The Opportunity Myth by TNTP. And I was really struck by one of the lines, and I put it in the slides. In fact, most students spent the vast majority of their school days missing out on 4 crucial resources: grade appropriate assignments, strong instruction, deep engagement, and teachers with really high expectations. And the article resonated with me. And as I walked around in classrooms in our very balanced literacy school and district, I started thinking about what kids were getting throughout the day. They were receiving 15 minutes mini lessons, and then they were asked to apply these strategies in their choice books, which, if any of you are in elementary school, looks a lot like Dork Diaries, Dog Man, and they were doing it. They were very compliant, but I started feeling really unsettled in that, and I kept going back to the article and thinking something was beginning to sort of grow in the pit of my stomach, and so in February 2019, we were able to attend the Standards Institute with Unbound Ed. And that was really like a huge catalyst for our learning. We had an entire week to do an intensive deep dive into the shifts in the Common Core and really thinking about foundational skills and the simple view of reading. And this was all new language to us. And Lacey Robinson, who's now the chief of Unbound Ed, really struck me when she put a slide up that said, "Love is not enough. It's about ensuring kids have access to really good, high quality materials and access to reading and good literacy instruction, good foundational skills." So that kind of brings us to chapter 2, which I would call Recalculating. One of my favorite poets, Claudia Rankine, had a line in an On Being podcast where she said, "I was thinking about the GPS in my car. It never gets annoyed with me. If I make a mistake, it says recalculating. And then it tells me to make the soonest left turn and go back." I thought to myself, I should write a book about it called Recalculating, because I think that's where we're doing all the time. That something happens, it challenges us, and challenge is okay. And that was really like reassuring to me, like it's okay. And so I really believed after Standards Institute that we could interrupt and disrupt this work, but it was going to require a lot of vulnerability. And for me, that meant coming back to my staff, and I called an emergency staff meeting, and I stood there and I cried, and I said, "I think I've led you astray. But I think together we can do this work, but it's going to require a lot of vulnerability, and it's going to require us to examine our practices and everything that we've held to be true. And because the water in which we swim in the state of Wisconsin is balanced literacy, and to do something different is, I think, really brave and courageous work." So we started by just doing a lot of reading and thinking. We started with Emily Hanford's podcast. So Lisa, I'm there with you. We were reading it in Stoughton. And across the district, we started reading Hanford's podcast. And then we started diving into all of the folks that you've mentioned. We Lieben and Lieben, Seidenberg, who's here at UW-Madison, Kilpatrick, Wexler, Wellingham, Achieve the Core, and really began asking questions like, what happens if all students are given access to really robust systematic instruction? What happens if we put grade level content and complex text at the core? What happens if we build knowledge through content-rich nonfiction and fiction? So I'm thinking of the simple view of reading, right? And what happens if we adopt instructional materials across all content areas? And so we did like a very deep study over the course of a year. And I think our third chapter, which is the most exciting chapter, I would probably title Strong Materials in the Hands of Great Teachers. And you can actually move to the second slide, which would be great. And I'm really grateful to the work of Sheila Briggs and our DPI literacy team. We were able to join the Instructional Materials and Professional Learning series last year. And that series introduced us to instruction partners who have a great tool for selecting really good instructional materials. So through that work, we were able to figure out, we really wanted to have a vision of literacy that was written by Stoughton for Stoughton. And we were able to develop that literacy vision across our district for our elementary teams. And through that work over the last couple of years, we've been really busy. As you can see, in 1920, we went right ahead and adopted Sunday System as our foundational system. I should stop talking. It's my 7 minutes.
Keep going.
Can I just finish really quickly?
Yes, absolutely. You are fine. Keep going.
Okay. And then we also adopted Handwriting Without Tears, that encoding piece. Like we have to have good, strong phonics curriculum, good, strong handwriting. We also believe in adopting really strong materials across all content areas and adopted Bridges Math. And then this year, in the middle of a pandemic, we adopted Wit and Wisdom, K5, and as the 4K principal also. We also adopted Sunday and Haggerty in kindergarten as just a little boost in our kindergarten. So we've been really busy, but I'll tell you, it is the most powerful and inspiring work that I could ever have chosen to engage in. And getting great materials in the hands of our exceptional teachers and seeing them flourish, I think is one of the most powerful experiences. And I think it's really just about, at the end of the day, it's about a community discovering what they care about. And we're doing that in Stoughton, and I'm proud to be here to hear about all of your journeys. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Erin. And I put that on as a question about selecting instructional materials. I know some of the people that are on with us today, and that's where they're at right now in their journey. And where can we go to look for instructional materials? The people that have gone before us in their journey. And you all did that today as well to help with that next piece. So thank you, Erin. Okay, so Q&A, and now, of course, because I was adding it on another computer, let me see if I can get this. There we go. So we have about around 10 minutes for Q&A. And Mary, if you could let me know if there's any other questions that we want to get to from the chat. These were some of the questions that were coming up that I was thinking of and that I saw. If you could let me know, Mary, of any other questions as well.
There aren't any other questions really in the chat right now. So if people have specific questions, if you want to type them in there, we will answer those before we answer the questions that we thought up. So feel free to do that.
And we have a hand raising feature too, if there's anyone that wants to raise their hand and ask a question live.
Yeah, that's if I can figure out how to work that. So we'll have to have more people than me watching out for that.
So what we'll do right now then is Mary is checking that. I'm going to start with the first question that came up, and that came along with Colleen's conversation about what universities are grounded in the science of reading and how is Carroll University moving forward. So why don't, if Colleen, if you could take that, and then if anybody else has suggestions about starting from the beginning, as you're looking for, as you're interviewing teachers for new positions in your district, what universities are we looking out for that are grounding themselves in evidence-aligned instruction?
Sure, and I can only speak for Carroll. I do not know what other universities are doing, or want to presume that I know what they're doing. But I will say one thing that we've done at Carroll is Mount St. Joseph's has their, I think their rubrics that they actually have for courses. And we, as a team, went through and looked through their rubrics and realigned some pieces in our own coursework. It's a work in progress. I only have there's only 2 methods courses right now at Carroll for literacy, which really is not enough. Unfortunately, but it's really difficult in higher ed to add credits. That's a tough sell and an administrative sell because we want to graduate people. But we have done a good job about trying to create courses that are attached to practicum. So one thing I used to do an embedded, well, we still have an embedded field placement, but where I work is very much a balanced literacy. The school districts around us are very much, I would say, still in the balanced literacy through some changes, but not enough. So one thing I'm doing, or was planning to do before the pandemic, but now
that's at the store right now, so we're late,
is one-on-one tutoring and as the placement instead of trying to work with schools themselves. I think it would be a lot richer for them to actually work for their practicum with a student one-on-one who needs support. And those are pieces. And we also have a brand new dyslexia interventionist certificate, which is taken off like crazy. And Annika, who was speaking in the next April symposium or roundtable, is the instructor for that, as Tammy Tillotson as well. And that is a year-long program to certify individuals as dyslexia interventionists.
Great, yes, thank you for mentioning that Annika is coming in our April meeting. Do any of the other panelists have any information about universities and their pre-service programs?
We do have one question in the chat, Rachel, and that is how have districts considered, or have they considered, implementation science? I don't know if that term is familiar to everyone. That's a question.
I'm just going to touch base on that. I heard that term in the Amplify symposium on Thursday in implementation science, and I'm hearing that term coming more and more. And my understanding is referring to the science behind when you are implementing something. There is a science to the best methods of implementing something within your school district. So do any of you have that information?
Amy, do you want to unmute and just say a few words about implementation?
Oh, and Amy, I talked to Amy recently about implementation science.
She's on here, so if you can unmute yourself.
Amy out.
Sure. Well, and
Amy, do you want to quick introduce yourself so people know who you are?
Sure. I'm Amy Mcgovern. I'm also the vice president of the Reading League. I work for CISA 9 in Tomahawk. I was the district reading specialist in Wausau for many years, and also we did the journey. So that's a whole other story. But and So implementation science is something that I wish that I was more deeply aware of when we started our journey. So if this is a new term for you, then you need to start doing your homework, because it's all about like the 5-year plan and what happens when you bring new teachers in, and how many coaches do you have, and how do you facilitate change, and what about the people who are really not getting on the boat, they're going to try to sabotage. How do you handle those people? Like, it's this big comprehensive piece, and there's a wealth of research around it. So, and I thought we had all the answers, I thought we had things, hindsight is 2020. So that's my advice to you, that those of you that are on this journey, to really like be asking the hard questions of what if and what do we do when, because those will be the things that get you, that stumble the process. It's never linear. Progress is always 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. So you have to be prepared for that. But the more you have kind of locked and loaded on that implementation science piece, it will help you think through the pieces that you might be assuming that you've got worked out, or that you have a plan for, and that perhaps need more strengthening. So.
And Rachel, just to add to that, Amy, just thinking about, when I think about one of our biggest mistakes, I believe, in education, is we spend a lot of time looking at our neighbors and what everybody else is doing, which is why we're in this. And I am guilty as charged in that as well. Well, this district's doing this and this district's doing this, and then assuming that that is best practice. And so that's something I see on our social media too, is like, well, what are you all doing? And I love when folks are able to redirect it to implementation science, because it really is about getting it right for your district and your vision. And your vision may be very different. Your vision of equity and literacy may be very different from neighboring districts. So leaning on, I mean, we've leaned on the curriculum support guide through instruction partners, but leaning on a tool to help move us through that process, I think, is really important.
Thank you. So true. And I could spend many more hours talking about school districts that jump on somebody else's idea only to go and look deeper at that district's data, and how their data actually was not supportive of over like a 7-year period of what they had implemented. So it's an important piece. And again, I'm coming from the background of being an RTI director and coordinator, and that database decision making being so important. So always more conversations to come around these topics, but I think it's good we are having those conversations, even getting started, like implementation science. And thank you to Amy for going deeper into that piece, and knowing that that's an important piece that we all may need to educate ourselves more on. I don't think any school district in Wisconsin has a position in their district as they are the director of implementation science.
No, and they're not. That's right. And that's where the curriculum, sorry to interrupt you, Rachel, but that's where the leadership matters so much, because they're holding the purse strings and they're deciding what gets money, what doesn't. And, that long-term commitment is so crucial, because there will be year 1 and year 2 are not the hard years. Those are the years that people are like kind of in, it's year 3 and year 4 and year 5 that things really can fall apart if you don't have a really solid plan. And it's the bigger the district, the tougher the deal. So Madison, a lot of things to think through for you as being such a big district and having so many teachers to work with and to support. But hats off to all of you for making these changes, because every change, no matter what, you'll reach teachers regardless, and it'll save kids.
And I think that really does speak to, well, Amy, about the importance of that C&I position, whether you call it C&I director of teaching and learning. I love in education how we have all these different terms and for the same thing. But the importance of that position, and hats off to C&I directors that really are dedicated to what their position is, because it encompasses a lot. But I can't think of I mean, that to me is such an important position in a school district, because it really, like you said, Amy, holds the purse strings, supports the district in the direction that they're going in. And I liked Misty's what she said about how she's not doing the work, she's facilitating the work. And that's an important piece on that facilitation. Another question which Colleen brought up, and I think for me it was my light bulb moment, and in David Kilpatrick's book about orthographic mapping, a term most likely to have never been heard. And I think of all my 30 plus years in education, and it wasn't until 2 years ago that I had ever even heard that term. So can any of you speak to, for any of our people that are listening in, if they don't know about orthographic mapping, suggestions on where to get started learning about orthographic mapping?
I think David Kilpatrick's book, Equipped for Reading Success, has a fantastic chapter. Chapter 4 and chapter 5 kind of shed light on that, and he just puts it in terms that make sense.
Does anyone have, okay, so the Equipped for Success, I wish I had my book here. If anyone has any of those books, I love the visuals, and if I was computer savvy enough, I'd click on those links. But I agree with what you said, orthographic mapping, I learned from David Kilpatrick. Oh, how about I look right here? Can you all see me?
And this one too.
Oh, yeah, that's the one. Yep.
This one is David Kilpatrick's other book, The Essentials of Assessing, Preventing, and Overcoming Reading Difficulties. It's just like, this has been my Bible for the past 5 years.
It was my starting point as well, after Twitter, which I am not a social media person, but I can't tell you how much I have learned from Twitter in terms of resources and learning about symposiums. And right now, I mean, a positive out of COVID is I don't have to get in a plane and fly to Louisiana or fly to Syracuse, and people are offering so many free professional development opportunities. Like I said, I spent my entire day on Thursday in a symposium in the comfort of my pajamas. So one more thing for sure I want to touch on, because I know we just have about 6 minutes. Letters training came up a lot in many of your presentations, and I think that's an important piece. Who can speak to letters training to just give a minute summary of what is letters?
I can talk about letters. It's an acronym that stands for Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. It comes in 2 4-unit bundles. 1 through 4 really deals with the word recognition pieces, if you think of Scarborough's reading rope, and then units 5 through 8, the upper strands, the vocabulary, syntax, language comprehension strands, and it's fantastic. I think my minute is up.
You're fine. Anybody else want to add more to that, please?
Lisa, are you doing that? Do most people who are doing letters today, are they doing online or?
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, Mary. I did letters 1 through 4 all by myself after hearing Emily Hanford's podcast. I paid for it myself and it was worth every penny, but I did miss 2 things. I missed having an in-person coach, who really knows how to, implement the material and also how it looks spread throughout, a building and a district. And I also miss the community of doing it with teachers in a cohort, and then, talking about how what we're studying in the book, how that works with kids, and then that whole, teaching and learning cycle.
Yeah, my experience with letters is we did some letters training in Milwaukee for about 3 or 4 cohorts worth. And we did, for the first cohort, with an in-person instructor we did all 12 modules. It took a year, and we would come once a month and do an entire Saturday. And so we had a national letters trainer guiding the sessions. We had 30 to 40 people in our group. And that was a really helpful way to do it. But I know that that's not possible for all districts. And so I was glad to see that they beefed up their online component. And I think that I do agree that it's always going to be better regardless of what training it is you're doing. If you're doing letters or you're doing something else, if you can have a cohort moving through together and you can have someone with a decent level of knowledge guiding that cohort and guiding the discussion, you're just going to get a lot more out of it. You know, Amy just posted this, the second edition of letters was 12 modules, now it's 8. So they're kind of, they continue to reorganize and think through the most efficient way to deliver all the information.
Thank you. It connects to something I saw the other day, research, and I wish I was getting better at keeping a quick link of all the research that I'm seeing, but that students that are progressing the most have teachers that have a higher or a deeper, richer knowledge of the code and our understanding of being able to teach phonics and understanding phonics themselves. And remembering I came from whole language university and received very little instruction, to the point I remember my first day teaching, and I was told that I would be teaching the short A. And again, this was 1990. I'm like, what's a short A? So I can see the understanding of the research of teachers that understand how to phonics, and the understanding of it and how to teach it is going to make a bigger difference. And I think that's why we're seeing so many districts using letters as a basis for that professional development. My alarm just went off and we have 2 more questions on there. So something that I will make sure we touch base on more in April when we have our meeting in April. And I cannot get my, sorry, I'm not able to control my screen right now. There we go. So a few more things just to say at the end here are some links. And again, this recording will be on our YouTube, the Reading League Wisconsin YouTube. And we have some links to other organizations and school districts that have done the same type of roundtables that will give you more information on other people's journeys if you are interested. And as we said, we have another roundtable of Wisconsin educators coming on April 15th. So we hope you can join us for that as well. And I once again want to thank everybody. I think we had a great day of hearing from a variety of, from the universities to large school districts to small school districts throughout Wisconsin. And I thank everybody for participating, and I thank our panelists for their work and preparing for the roundtable and sharing their knowledge. And I hope you have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you very much.